Tonight at 6, we're live in Downing Street, where Rishi Sunak has become Prime Minister, the UK's third in 7 weeks. He faces a series of major challenges, top of which is a severe economic crisis. He spoke here a few hours ago of difficult decisions he would have to take.
I fully appreciate how hard things are. And I understand too that I have work to do to restore trust after all that has happened.
Earlier, Mr. Sunak was sworn in at Buckingham Palace by King Charles. He arrived in Downing Street to a warm reception and then set to work on his new cabinet. No change in 2 of the big offices of state. Jeremy Hunt stays at the Treasury and James Cleverly remains Foreign Secretary. Suella Braverman returns as Home Secretary less than a week after she resigned, and Dominic Raab is Deputy Prime Minister.
The dilemmas of government are instant: who to hire and who to fire, as Rishi Sunak attempts to assemble a team that can last, that his party will support.
It comes as new figures show the task in hand, with the price of some household basics soaring.
You can see it on the shelves when you go into the supermarkets. You've got to really think about making better choices.
Ultimately, the cost needs to come down, or people's income needs to go up.
We'll be looking at the serious issues confronting the new government with our editors and correspondents across the UK.
And at 6:30, as a new Prime Minister takes over, we hear how some Londoners are facing rising food bills and others tough living standards.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6, live from Downing Street, where a few hours ago the UK's 57th Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged to work day in, day out to deliver for the country and to earn the trust of the British people. He was sworn in at Buckingham Palace by the King to be the 3rd Prime Minister this year. Standing outside number 10, Mr. Sunak warned that the nation is facing profound economic uncertainty, and he promised to fix the mistakes made by his predecessor, Liz Truss. He dismissed calls for a general election, saying the mandate won by his party in 2019, when Boris Johnson was leader, belonged to every Conservative MP, and he wanted to deliver on their manifesto pledges. Rishi Sunak spent the day appointing his new cabinet, and we'll have more on that in a moment. But first, our political editor Chris Mason reports on yet another momentous day in British politics.
10 to 12 this morning, Downing Street's security gates had swung open, the motorcade swept in, heralding another new arrival here. Here he comes, Rishi Sunak, walking up Downing Street alone to the podium to address the country for the first time as Prime Minister.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name. It is only right to explain why I'm standing here as your new Prime Minister. Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis.
A business-like, sober tone, a blunt, direct assessment of the country's predicament and future.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country, but some mistakes were made. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them. This will mean difficult decisions to come.
Translation: spending cuts and/or tax rises appear likely. And here's why the new Prime Minister doesn't think there needs to be a general election. The Conservatives won the last one, he said, not Boris Johnson.
The mandate my party earned in 2019 is not the sole property of any one individual.
He concluded by addressing the political crisis that has raged in recent weeks.
I understand too that I have work to do to restore trust after all that has happened. All I can say is that I am not daunted. We will create a future worthy of the sacrifices so many have made, and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter with hope. Thank you.
The era, or at least stint, of Rishi Sunak begins. An extraordinary moment. He was plunged into the political wilderness just weeks ago, and now he is Prime Minister. His task, colossal. The photographers shouted at the Prime Minister, asking for a smile.
Cheer up, Rishi!
He pretty much resisted. Before the day's big moment, the now familiar choreography of a day with two Prime Ministers, one out ahead of the other in. Not every moment is riveting. Oh, and if you've ever wondered what political failure looks like, this is it. A removal van turning up in Downing Street. It's our old friend, the lectern. We've seen rather a lot of it in recent weeks. Here it comes back out into the street again for Liz Truss's goodbye speech. The outgoing Prime Minister's closest colleagues gather, her deputy to raise coffee, turning photographer. Oh, here we go. Here she comes. Accompanying her and watching from the pavement, her husband and daughters.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses.
Liz Truss brought defiance, not apology, and an instinct her defining aim was right.
From my time as Prime Minister, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be bold. We simply cannot afford to be a low-growth country where the government takes up an increasing share of our national wealth. Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people. And I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
A Prime Minister departs just 7 weeks after she arrived. This moment capturing the unprecedented turbulence that has gripped British politics and captured international attention for all the wrong reasons. Moments later, her final act as Prime Minister, a trip to Buckingham Palace to resign. The King would later ask Rishi Sunak to form a government, this photo confirming him as our new Prime Minister.
We've had 12 years now of Conservative failure, and we're now on to our third Conservative Prime Minister in 3 months. They don't have a mandate to govern. Rishi Sunak himself has no mandate.
The real problem we have, this isn't one Prime Minister changing during the lifetime of a Parliament. This is the third Prime Minister in the space of 2 months.
Rishi Sunak has asked today for the British people to trust him. Yet the Conservatives won't put their trust in the British people by giving them a say in a general election. People are worried sick out there. There are millions of struggling families and pensioners. They need more help.
Tonight, the new cabinet is taking shape. Jeremy Hunt remains as Chancellor.
Nice Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
The most eye-catching appointment is Suella Braverman. She resigned as Home Secretary last Wednesday. 6 days later, she's back as Home Secretary. Inside number 10, the difficult business of governing is underway. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, as we've been hearing from Chris, Rishi Sunak's cabinet is taking shape. Let's have a closer look at who's in it. Of the 3 main offices of state, 2 remain the same. Jeremy Hunt is Chancellor and James Cleverly stays at the Foreign Office. Suella Braverman, as you heard, is Home Secretary. She resigned only last week after breaching ministerial rules on using a personal email address for official documents. Elsewhere in the cabinet, Dominic Raab has been reappointed Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, positions that he held under Boris Johnson. And Ben Wallace keeps his job as Defence Secretary. And moments ago, it was announced that Michael Gove returns to frontline politics, to the job that he held under Boris Johnson, that's Levelling Up Secretary. Well, let's get more on all this now from Chris. And looking at that lineup, Chris, what do you make of the way that Rishi Sunak's government is shaping up?
Rita, this is an attempt to assemble a team in a range of shades of blue, if you like, a Conservative coalition. Why? Because the new Prime Minister wants to bind as many wings of his parliamentary party into his project to try and ensure, bluntly, that they will back him. So crucially, because he wants to emphasise stability, the retention of Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. But then, as you were referring to there, the real eye-catcher is the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary less than a week after she left the Home Office. The door will have barely shut at the Home Office, marking her departure, and she's pushing the door back to go in. Elsewhere, as we look round Whitehall, a reminder of the turbulence of recent months. Gillian Keegan, the 5th Education Secretary for England in the last 4 months, if I've done my maths right. And so, again, a reminder of that balance between Rishi Sunak wanting to assemble a team that he feels is right, whilst at the same time trying to project stability at a time of constantly swirling change. And then, as you just mentioned there, just breaking in the last couple of minutes, the reappointment of Michael Gove, a big beast of the Conservative Party and someone who can cause trouble when he's not kept busy in government, back in government as Levelling Up Secretary. So this, Rishi Sunak's attempt to bind his party together, because he knows unless he does that, governing will be impossible.
Chris, we'll have more from you later in the programme, but for the time being, thank you. So what do voters around the country make of the extraordinary events that we've been witnessing here at Westminster? Well, Worksop in Bassetlaw is a former Labour heartland in Nottinghamshire, which turned Conservative in 2019. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth reports now on how people there view Britain's latest Prime Minister.
The economic picture feels pretty scary for many right now. In Worksop, these friends meet for coffee when they can. All three understand struggle. All three are sceptical when politicians promise solutions. Dina said the new Prime Minister should visit her church to see those they're having to help.
They are working people as well as those on benefits, having to come for food and clothes now as well, and furniture and pots and pans. He has money, so he's all right. But I'd like him to see what it's like for those that aren't.
Alison cares for the elderly in a sector she says is underpaid and overworked.
We're struggling really badly.
How do you feel about Rishi Sunak?
I would have liked to have seen a general election. He was thrust upon us. I've always been Conservative, always, but we're just going from one to the other.
For Sharon, rising bills means juggling work and looking after her granddaughter.
It's very worrying. They all make promises. Sometimes they keep some, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they make a complete hash of it. You know what I'm talking about.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace.
This Prime Minister promised to fix the mistakes, but here, talk of tough economic choices does cause concern.
Last time we went through austerity, it was the working class that paid. And, you know, if he comes to the working class to pay again, we haven't got it.
What did you think?
Big words. Let's see some big actions.
The proof is in the pudding.
With warnings of tight finances and no easy fixes, at this transport and logistics company, they want decisions that mean stability. Here, they repurpose old tyres for the renewable sector, so staff understand giving things another chance, even another Prime Minister.
During COVID, he was decisive and his plans were definitive, and I think he needs to carry out that thought process again.
He needs to let the people feel unafraid to put the heating on and worry about losing their house. He needs to keep his focus on levelling up in the north.
What did you make of his message about the economy and the choices the government might have to make?
He's telling us what we already know. How is he going to do that? Words are good, and his words were good, but I'd like to see the plan of how he's going to deliver that.
It will take some heavy lifting to offer real reassurance, particularly given the economic burden that's already causing strain for so many. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Worksop.
The work for Rishi Sunak begins immediately, and there are several major tasks coming up within the next few days. So let's take a look at those. Tomorrow he faces Sir Keir Starmer across the dispatch box in the Commons for his first Prime Minister's questions. Friday is the deadline to call a fresh election for the Northern Ireland Assembly at Stormont, unless government there resumes. The Democratic Unionist Party is currently blocking the formation of an executive in protest at the post-Brexit agreement, which puts a trade border between Northern Ireland and the British mainland. On Monday, the much-anticipated fiscal statement is due, and on Thursday, the Bank of England will announce its update to interest rates. Well, the biggest challenge, as Mr. Sunak acknowledged, will be dealing with the cost of living crisis. This morning, official figures further outlined the sharp squeeze on people's incomes, with some basic foods rising by more than 60% in the last year. Our economics editor Faisal Islam assesses the task ahead.
The ladies are going to do you a food parcel.
The new Prime Minister says in Downing Street the economy is in crisis. For many millions of people, that's a recognition of reality in their street, most notably seen in the food charities in every community like this one in Shildon, County Durham.
Food is a basic essential of life. It's not right that people are hungry and don't have food. That is not right.
Such has been the rise in prices that the Statistics Office is now measuring everyday inflation affecting household purchases. At 17%, it's much higher than the official rate. There have been some phenomenal rises in the prices of basic foods over the past year, driven by the war in Ukraine, weaker sterling and other factors. Pasta is up just under 60% in price. Tea is up 46%. Meanwhile, chips cost 38% more, and that most basic of foodstuffs, bread, is up by a similar number too. Chicken breasts were up 10% over the year. Orange juice, though, was down in price, just under 9%. Elsewhere in County Durham, a manufacturer of washing machines, EBAC, regularly visited by former PM Boris Johnson, expressed the need for a thorough clean-up of recent messes made in Westminster.
The chaos in Westminster now will pass. It might take 6 months, it might take longer, but it will pass. And in some ways, we've probably got to get worse before we get better. We've got to increase taxes. We've all got to pay more. And the people earning more have got to pay more. We've all got to accept we're in a problem. We're in a deep problem of cash shortage. We've got to all make sacrifices. We've got to work more and pay more taxes.
And the challenge for the new neighbours at number 10 and number 11 is that not everybody will be so accepting of such sacrifice to fix a problem they admit is partly of their party's making. Stability, financial credibility and the trust of the markets. These are essential and priceless commodities for any Downing Street team. And the early signs from the currency markets and the borrowing markets are that Mr. Sunak and Mr. Hunt are winning them back. And that should limit the rise in borrowing costs for mortgages and for businesses. But the cost is a set of tough decisions on tax rises and spending cuts required within days. British financial markets are no longer spinning out of control, but the new PM's task now is to limit the real economic damage to businesses and to households. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Well, people across the country have spent the day making their own assessments of the new Prime Minister. Let's get the view now from our correspondents in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, starting with Chris Page in Belfast, who's been speaking to people about what Mr. Sunak's appointment means for a nation which is potentially facing an election before Christmas.
He was supposedly knocked out, but he's come off the ropes to be crowned Tory champion. This mural in Belfast has been repainted repeatedly as the political prize fighting in London has played out. In a student area nearby, people have various thoughts on the new Prime Minister and how he got the job.
There's nothing democratic about that. I feel like they need to call a general election ASAP because it's crazy.
To be honest, it's better than Liz Truss anyway. You know.
What would you like him to prioritise for this part of the world?
Just mainly stabilise the economy, to be honest.
There's a really bad drug epidemic at the minute, and it probably needs prioritised over majority of things.
And the most immediate issue facing Rishi Sunak here is that Northern Ireland is currently without a devolved government. The Democratic Unionist Party says it'll continue to block the formation of a power-sharing coalition until the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK is removed. This Friday is the legal deadline for a devolved government to be formed, following the election to the Northern Ireland Assembly back in May, when Sinn Féin became the first Irish nationalist party ever to win the most seats. There's next to no chance that local ministers will be moving into their offices in Stormont this week. The current Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, is planning to call another Assembly election. The ongoing cabinet reshuffle is causing some uncertainty, but as things stand, voters are set to go back to the polls in December.
200 years ago, the Union Canal brought trade and prosperity here to Linlithgow. These days, the economic outlook is not nearly so bright. So is Rishi Sunak the leader to turn things around?
Well, still to be proven, let's say. Still to be proven, but I'm hopeful.
What about yourself?
I think he's been Chancellor, he understands what it's about, and I think he'll dismantle a lot of what Truss did that caused all the problems. We have to be serious. We can't live in borrowed money forever. So yes, let's expect cuts in the public service.
Well, I'm not a fan of the Tories in general, but I probably would say he would be my favourite option out of all the ones that possibly were going to stand.
If you were him, what would be the first thing you would do?
I would invest in social care.
I'm one of these people that are for a Scottish referendum. Sorry, but I am. I just think we need it. I never wanted Brexit either. And I'm sure he'll make a good job as a Prime Minister, but I trust our wee Nicola Sturgeon, you know. I love her.
The issue of independence is never far from the surface of politics in Scotland. For some voters, it is the #1 priority. But even so, right now, almost everyone wants to know exactly what Rishi Sunak is going to do about what he calls a profound economic crisis.
What can a new PM do for the people of Porthcawl? Can he quell the storm many here feel is rising? At his Café Mehmet counts empty tables. Customers are cutting back, inflation eating up his income. He hopes Rishi Sunak will help and, as in the pandemic, encourage people to eat out to help out.
Maybe a little business like us, they can get some support from the government, maybe tax-free or VAT can be looked into it.
Annette and Alice are mother and daughter. Neither's convinced that voters in Wales will relate to Mr Sunak or that he can relate to them.
I honestly can't see how someone with that wealth can ever really comprehend what
life is like here.
Life is like here, yeah.
I think more people should be taking to the streets, to be honest, to demand for a general election, because the general people didn't vote him in.
And this doesn't solve it for you, having Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister?
No.
In the last general election, the Tories took the seat from Labour, buoyed by a swell of support for Boris Johnson and promises of getting Brexit done. Over the last 3 years, so much of that has drained away, not just in this seat, but right around Wales.
To stop his party being wiped off the map in Wales, Mr Sunak must somehow turn that tide.
And that was the latest there with our correspondents across the UK. President Biden has described the appointment of the UK's first Prime Minister of colour as a groundbreaking milestone and said he would call to offer his congratulations soon. Mr Sunak comes to office facing huge international challenges, from the war in Ukraine to the global energy crisis. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has this analysis.
We've got breaking news on who will be Britain's new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak is the name.
He may be Britain's 5th Prime Minister in 6 years, but Rishi Sunak's arrival in Downing Street still made headlines. World leaders offered their congratulations, even if they didn't quite get his name right.
Rishi Sunak is now the Prime Minister. Pretty astounding.
A groundbreaking milestone, and it matters. It matters.
And not just in America.
History has been scripted in Britain as Rishi Sunak.
The fact that Mr. Sunak is a British Asian resonated around the world, especially in India, where the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, spoke of the living bridge of UK Indians that he hoped could transform historic ties into a modern partnership with Britain. But Mr. Sunak takes office while a war rages in Europe. And for all the warm welcome, many leaders just want to know his policy on this and other international challenges. The Prime Minister may struggle to be as popular in Kiev as Boris Johnson, but he's made clear he will reinforce Britain's total support for Ukraine. In a tweet, President Zelensky congratulated Mr. Sunak and said he was ready to continue strengthening the strategic partnership between Ukraine and Britain. But supporting Ukraine in the long run will cost money, largely from the coffers of the Ministry of Defence. And on this, Mr. Sunak's plans are less clear. Liz Truss promised to spend 3% of national wealth on defence. That's a huge increase, as much as £100 billion a year. Mr. Sunak dismissed that as an arbitrary target. Mr. Sunak will also have to deal with China, which recently launched missiles into the sea near Taiwan. He says China's a long-term threat to Britain, but it's also a trading partner, and getting the balance right won't be easy. And then there's Europe. Mr. Sunak campaigned as a committed Brexiteer, but some in the EU are hoping he'll adopt a more pragmatic approach on energy prices and trade disputes left over from Brexit. Ultimately, what many foreign leaders want to know is whether Mr. Sunak can give Britain the political stability his predecessors have not. James Landell, BBC News.
Well, those cabinet appointments going on in the building behind me are still coming through. Penny Mordaunt remains leader of the Commons, Steve Barclay is Health Secretary, and Kemi Badenoch remains as International Trade Secretary. Let's get a final thought on all of this with our political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, a busy night and a very busy few days ahead too.
Yeah, indeed so. I think we'll hear more appointments this evening and indeed into tomorrow at the lower ranks of government. But today, for the second time this autumn, a day of two prime ministers, a day of turbulence and a day of uncertainty. And a new prime minister determined to strike a sombre, business-like tone, a humble tone, but still one with confidence, trying to reset yet again the Conservatives in government and hoping by assembling this Conservative coalition of lots of different shades of blue that, as James Landale just mentioned at the end of his report, that it can be stable. Because without that, attempting anything will be impossible. And if you doubt that, let's look at the case studies of the last few months of Liz Truss and of Boris Johnson. And even if he manages that, and that is not guaranteed, the challenges he faces are colossal, not least economic, which so many of us are aware of. That task already underway with that big economic statement coming in just a few days' time.
Chris, thank you very much. Our political editor, Chris Mason, reporting. And just to say that you can get all the latest on the new Prime Minister as he continues to announce his new cabinet on our website. Just head to bbc.co.uk/news or use the BBC News app. OK, let's take a pause now and look at the weather. Here's Nick Miller.
Hi Rita, the weather was eclipsed by the eclipse today because it has been one of the quieter weather days we've had for quite some time, though we have rain back into southwest England and Wales at the moment, and as the week goes on it'll be more blustery than it has been today. It'll still be very mild, and there will be rain at times. I have to say, for many areas, a lot of the rain will be timed for the overnight period rather than falling during the day. So an area of low pressure is feeding rain across particularly western parts of the UK as we go through the night, but a lot of that does clear away tomorrow to sunshine and showers. And for the rest of the week, we're drawing the air from a long way south of the UK, and that does lift temperatures well above where we might expect them to be at this time of year. So as I mentioned, rain, Wales, southwest England, some heavier bursts into northwest England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, especially southwest Scotland as the night goes on, turning windier in all areas, coastal gales developing in the west, and temperatures overnight and for the rest of the week at or above daytime highs for the time of year. We start with that rain in northern Scotland tomorrow. That then feeds across the Northern Isles before clearing. There'll be showers following into Scotland and Northern Ireland, some heavy and possibly thundery, sunny spells in between. And there's a chance of catching the odd shower in England and Wales, though the bulk of the day will be dry. It'll be blustery, yes, these are average speeds, gusts in the Western Isles around 50 miles an hour or so, windy through Irish Sea coasts, and temperatures mid to upper teens, and there'll be some spots towards the east and southeast of England for the rest of the week at 20 or indeed above. This is Wednesday evening for you, and just a sign more cloud running into southern areas, and Thursday does look like a cloudier day, but a patchy rains, a few showers around. Then another area of low pressure feeding more rain, a lot of that again though overnight Thursday into Friday morning before clearing to sunny spells and a chance of a shower. Some of these symbols you see on Friday for rain early in the day rather than late in the day. And with temperatures staying like this, it does not feel like we're now into the final week of October, Rita.
Nick, thank you. Well, in a moment, we'll have the news where you are, but we leave you tonight with some of the key moments on another historic day here in Westminster. Bye-bye.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government.
Rishi Sunak himself has no mandate, and it should fall to the British people to decide the direction of our country.
Together, we can achieve incredible things and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter with hope. Thank you.